Alexa, stop!
Okay, so there are a couple of things going on there which really help to illustrate why adult speech technology is not going to work well for children. The first one is that you saw the child there was trying to interact with Alexa, and Alexa wasn't picking up very clearly what the child was saying. The child was actually asking for a song to be played by Alexa, right? So accuracy was a big issue for the child. The second point there was that the child was getting a response which actually wasn't appropriate for their age, right? So I don't think it's very appropriate for probably a 4 or 5-year-old child to be engaging with Alexa and getting content that is probably more suited to an adult audience, right? A third thing that we saw there was a child engaging with voice interface and going into an adult ecosystem and not a safe space for a child. So if you think about that, there are 3 real takeaways from this brief talk that I'm going to give today around how you design for voice interface for children. First of all, you need to think about the accuracy levels that you want to try and achieve. The second thing is you need to think about, is it age appropriate? And bearing in mind that a 4-year-old is not half an 8-year-old, right? So you need to think about age appropriateness. And then you need to think about basically putting children into a safe space with voice interface. And that's particularly relevant today when we think about data privacy, data protection concerns. Voice data is personal data. It's been defined as personal data. So we need to think about what kind of services we're asking our children to interact with and what is happening to the data that they are handing over to those services. So those are 3 takeaways that I want you to bring from this presentation today. And what do we actually mean by voice interface? Right, so how many people in the audience have a voice assistant home device in the home? Hands up. Not that many. If we were in the US, I suspect that there would be a lot more hands in the air. Something like 42 million devices in children's homes. There's another one there, so we had 3. In fact, I saw a statistic this morning, there's some research done this week to show that over 30% of consumers in the US have a smart assistant in their home. So clearly this stuff is going mainstream. Before we move on, before we go into some detail around these issues of accuracy, of age appropriateness, and of safety, I want to just basically lay out some definitions for you. So, first definition, fairly easy. Hands up in the audience who knows what we mean by children. Come on, don't be shy. Do you know what we mean by children? Yes, it's fairly international language. But what I'm talking about here in terms of children is 4 to 12-year-olds, right? So what we're doing is we're targeting a service of 4 to 12-year-olds. Why 4 to 12-year-olds? Well, first of all, there's a general rule in speech technology is that if a parent can't understand the child, it's fairly unlikely that the technology will understand the child, right? So under 4, children, unless they're particularly articulate, will not be able to be understood by technology. We do have our service working with 2 and 3-year-olds, particularly articulate 2 and 3-year-olds. Why 4 to 12? Well, generally speaking, children's voices are physiologically different to adults in the 4 to 12 age range. Particularly the younger you get, the closer down to the 4-year-old. But also behaviorally, the way they operate and the way they speak is differently, and particularly the younger they get. And very much so, a 4 and a 5-year-old speaks in a very different way to a 6, a 7 and an 8-year-old. So we have to think very carefully about that. From a data privacy point of view, it is a coincidence that we're targeting these 4 to 12-year-olds. And we have age of consent now in the European Union for GDPR, for data privacy, at the age of 13. In the US with COPA, it's 13. That's a coincidence. It's not that we choose 4 to 12 because it's under the age of consent. The second definition I want to talk about is this area of automatic speech recognition, or ASR. And most people's engagement or most people's reference point for ASR is actually these kind of speech assistants that we see. Those speech assistants that we see in the home are actually doing a little bit more than ASR. They're actually trying to do an end-to-end, almost ASR service. But when we talk about speech recognition, what we're talking about is the ability to listen to what somebody is saying and convert that into text. So it's kind of a speech to text. When we move into the next area of natural language processing, what we're talking about is being able to interpret the meaning behind that text. So we move from speech to text to interpretation. And what you're seeing with things like Alexa is that whole sort of graduation from speech into understanding what you're saying and actually interpreting what you're saying, right? So there's an intelligent engine sitting behind that. But those are two separate services that are basically conflated together to give you an experience through that device. We also hear the phrases artificial intelligence and machine learning being bandied around quite a lot. We use machine learning significantly in terms of the service that we build in order to interpret a very large data set. I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. And in that context, machine learning is really a subset of AI. AI is an all-encompassing term, which means that we can train computers to understand very large data sets and give the impression of delivering intelligence. So those are just some very simple definitions that I wanted to put out there so that we're all on the same page when we start talking about the next set of issues. And as I said to you, voice interface is becoming mainstream. Okay? We're having devices put into our homes that work out of the box. It is clear that children are going to engage with these devices. It doesn't matter if it's a smart speaker, a smart TV, a connected fridge. All of these devices will have voice interface, and because they're in the home, children will interface with them. We cannot avoid that. We can't tell our children, well, we can try and tell our children not to interface with these devices, but the likely outcome of that it will just encourage them to do it more. So we need to think about the design issues about how we design for children in this new world of voice interface. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail now about each of those areas around accuracy, around age appropriateness, and around safety and privacy. So, first up, accuracy. How do we achieve very high accuracy in terms of speech technology for children? So this graphic that you can see on the screen here, hopefully you can see at the back, gives you an idea about the kind of approach that we're taking. This is a data problem now. This is not a technology problem anymore. This is a data problem, okay? The reason that our service is very different to a lot of the other commercial services that are out there for children is that we collect data in real-world environments. So most commercial speech recognition systems that are commercially available for kids are using data sets that are very old and are collected using headsets and microphones. I don't know about your children, but my children don't use headsets and microphones an awful lot when they're interacting with technology, or if they're in school, or if they're in a cafe, or if they're in the back of the car. And so, in order for the speech technology to work in those real-world environments, you have to have a data set that is collected in real-world environments. What we have done over the last 4 years is to collect thousands of hours of children's speech from about 55,000 different users in 180 countries. So we have probably one of the largest proprietary children's voice data sets in the world, if you exclude some of those bigger organizations like Google. What we then do is we take machine learning techniques, we use deep neural nets to actually understand that very large data set. We place that in the cloud. We allow an open API licensing model, so you can plug your existing products into our speech technology. We don't require headsets. Our technology will work on the cheapest Android devices right up to your fairly expensive iPads, or maybe there's some cheaper iPads coming with an announcement later on today from Apple. And we'll use real-world noise environments, so we can exclude background noise, the kind of noise that you would get in an environment where a child would be operating normally, a classroom, the back of a car, a cafe. What's interesting here in terms of the application areas for this technology is that we can assess pronunciation attempts down to the individual phoneme level, right? So we can address, in this example here, you can see the child is saying cat. We can assess the pronunciation attempt of each individual phoneme, the k-at sounds that make up the word cat. And we can report back to the user, or the client user application, how the child has performed in each of those phonemes. What most people don't realize is that all speech technology actually is based around phonemic sounds, right? There are only a certain number, there are a limited number of sounds that make up our language in everyday use. And if you collect enough of those sounds in those buckets and you build a speech engine on top of that, you can pretty much cover every word that's available. The problem with kids is that the way they use those sounds is behaviorally actually quite different to adults. They'll mispronounce things, they'll repeat things, they'll shout, they'll say other random words that they just think of because it's a great word to use. And so that's why you need a slightly different approach when you're dealing with children. In terms of accuracy, it's actually quite hard to benchmark these services. Not many people publish results around accuracy for performance, for speech recognition for kids. But in the latest benchmark that we did, our system, if you look at the F score in the table on the right-hand side, basically a percentage, we achieved around 98% relative to 87% from Disney, who did a similar test about a year ago with the data set that they have. So basically, the message is the larger the data set and the broader variety of data that you have in that data set, the better results you can achieve if you have the appropriate language and acoustic models built on top of that. So that's accuracy. All of our data at the moment is English speaking. What we're doing is we've just been awarded a grant from the European Union to scale the platform into multiple languages. We'll be doing 6 more languages over the next 2 years, including Mandarin, Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, and Italian. We will be doing data collection exercises in order to build those models out within the next 12 to 18 months. So let's talk a little bit about context and age appropriateness and context appropriateness. So voice user interface is a new discipline in many ways. It's been around for a long time, but in terms of the mainstream, it's actually new in terms of design. And one of the challenges that we're facing in terms of working with our customers is helping them to understand, well, how do they take into account the design requirements of voice within their existing product portfolio? So whether it's a child literacy app, whether it's a language learning app, whether it's a VR experience, whether it's a game, whether it's a robotic device, how do you build that design experience such that the voice aspect is engaging enough for the child to want to use? You can see a number of different experiences here, from a mobile device, a phone, through to a touchscreen tablet, through to a VR experience. They are all very different experiences, and how you incorporate voice into those design experiences is very different, and it's still a relatively new discipline. This is how we work. So our system exists in the cloud. It's a very simplistic illustration. There's a cloud at the top, that's our service at the top of it. You send us a voice file, we assess that voice file, we send you back a result in near real time. The result that we send you back, you can then integrate into the experience that the child is having with whatever product you are currently delivering to them. We are device and experience agnostic in many ways. We deliver part of the plumbing. What we do is we work with you to help you to understand how you can incorporate voice into your existing product set or a new product that you might want to bring to market. So if that's, as I said, early childhood literacy, language learning, it could be a literacy product with a robotic device. It could be a social emotional robot. It could be an experience within virtual reality. For us, we're entirely agnostic about that. The technology, the underlying technology, will work in all of those different use cases. But it's up to you to be able to articulate what that use case is. Here are some examples. So if we start from the bottom left, this is a phonological awareness app. So this is kind of pre-literacy. So what we're asking the children to do, these are children that cannot read, we're asking them to say the word snail, but leave out the nail. So you're asking them to say s. And the speech technology will assess how well they've said s, or you can ask them to say snail and leave out the s, and they say nail. So they don't need to be able to read, but they can actually hear what's being said, and what you're doing is you're trying to promote phonological awareness, the understanding that words are actually made up of sounds, and those sounds themselves, aggregated together, form a word. If we move up to the top left, that's a very simple phonics exercise. So the word carpet is formed of 2 different sounds, carpet, and we can assess each of those different sounds individually. Same with the word cat. This is a cat, or in the bottom right, very topical, we have Peter Rabbit. This is a reading comprehension application area. So all of these different application areas can be supported by the same underlying technology. This is a slightly different approach. Here we have some voice control, so command control, whether it's Internet of Things, robotics, gaming, virtual reality. I'll just play a very simple video. This is not an end user product that I'm going to show you here. This is an avatar that we've created that basically illustrates how the technology can be used with a dialogue with a character on screen.
7. What is 3 plus 2?
5.
That's right, the answer is 5. I love farm animals. Let's talk about them. What's your favorite farm animal with 4 legs?
Horse.
Horses are so big and pretty. My favorite color is green. What's yours?
Gold.
Gold makes me think of treasure. How old are you?
8.
8, as many years as a spider's legs.
It's just a very simple example of a structured dialogue with a child designed to achieve certain outcomes. The child believes that they're entering into an open-ended dialogue with an avatar. I've tried this out with my kids. It's amazing to see their responses. But it's actually what they're getting into is a structured dialogue. And actually, it's the design aspect of that structured dialogue which is the important part. So if you're trying to achieve, for example, a learning outcome with a child through that structured dialogue, you can design it in such a way to achieve that. But this technology gives you the ability to be able to do that using voice interface as opposed to touch or gesture. So let's talk very briefly before we finish up about privacy and safety. Data privacy is kind of hot topic at the moment, given what's happening with our friends on Facebook. But particularly with children, we need to understand a couple of very key principles. First of all, voice data is personal data. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday. We got into a conversation about whether or not it should be. It doesn't matter whether it should be personal data or not. It is defined as personal data because ultimately you can actually identify an individual from voice data. So it is personal data in the legislation. Even though we now have a situation where we can bring the age of consent down to 13, children under 13, you're required to get informed consent from the parent if you want to store that personal voice data of the child. So you can see how that's problematic in the space of a device that goes into the home. How do you ensure that you have informed consent from all the adults of all the children who are going to interact with that device in the home? Right, so my kids have friends over, their friends start interacting with my Alexa device. Do I have the informed consent of their parent for those children to be able to interact with that device? The likelihood is that I don't, unless I'm extremely organized before the birthday party happens. So the FTC in the US recently ruled that actually it's okay not to get informed consent as long as the provider of the speech service, you're not storing that data after you've processed it in order to be able to give a response. Now the issue there for a lot of speech providers is that they're not going to build a separate ecosystem which is going to take into account children under 13, and they're not going to want to delete that data because they need that data in order to be able to justify their own business models. So we have an issue here. We also have this principle of right of erasure, so we all have the right to ask for that data to be removed from those services. But ultimately, as a principle, what we're trying to do as a business is to guarantee the authenticity and the integrity of the data that we use. We're only interested in building a better product around speech technology. We don't use the data to target advertising. We don't use the data to try to profile users in order to sell them other products. All we're doing is using the data in order to be able to improve the service, and therefore we can guarantee the authenticity and integrity of that data and the trust of our customers. So we have a patent pending privacy by design approach that allows us and enables us to provide highly accurate and child appropriate voice interfaces, but it also means that we can help our customers to ensure that they have better data protection and legal compliance. It's all about being proactive about an approach to privacy for children's data in that context. So, very simple example of how that would work. Here you have, at the top of the screen, you have Cortana, the Microsoft system. A child speaks, it's detected that it's a child. The child is diverted away into a safe space that is accurate, age-appropriate, and safe for that child, and is not going into the ecosystem that's actually been built for adult skills. So those are the 3 takeaways interface I'd like to give you. So if you're thinking about voice interface design, you're thinking about voice interface for your products, you need to think about accuracy, you need to think about age appropriateness, and you need to think about safety. We are Soapbox Labs. This is our team, the best looking speech technology team in the world. There are 10 of us, but 7 different nationalities. We're based in Dublin. All the contact information is there. You can find us in the program of events. And if anybody wants to talk to me, I'll be around for the rest of today and tomorrow. We have a slot over in the business lounge, and you can just ask at the reception. Thank you very much for listening.